Welcome to Donington Park and the third and final race of the weekend for the Radical European Masters. James Littlejohn and Tony Wells have scored victory in the opening two races of the weekend. Will they be able to make it a clean sweep, or will Manhal Alos and Alex Kapadia finally be able to get the better of them? It's Littlejohn and Wells who line up on the front row of the grid ahead of the entry of Andrew Ferguson, with plenty of battling to be found throughout the field again. Alison Kapadia some way down the field as they were in race one. So the pace car bringing them around, a rolling start of course, so it is going to be Andrew Ferguson second on the grid, just alongside him James Littlejohn taking the start. So Littlejohn will do what he can to build that buffer early on, and we've got Ricardo Dona in third place. He is the foremost of the Supersport class runners alongside his main rival Marcello Martiotto. Martiotto and Cenchetti disappointed to retire in race two, is about to go ready for the final time this weekend, and away we go. As you can see, Manhal's bobbing and weaving behind, trying to gain as much ground en route towards Redgate for the first time as Littlejohn turns through in the lead from Ferguson's behind. There's contact and Brian Caldwell has tagged Ricardo Dona, and we've got plenty more cars running off in all sort of trouble. Peter Tyler was one of the ones involved. I think the Harveys and Yanni Herpia also caught up. Well, there is Dona. He rejoins, and it was all looking very busy into Redgate. Others might emerge from the dust at some point. Not that it's of any concern at all for James Littlejohn. In fact, absolutely perfect for Littlejohn. This is his chance to spring the gap on the field, but already Manhal Alos scything his way through past the Supersport runners. Jim Booth in the Spider staying out of trouble, and Andrew Ferguson in second place, but already having his mirrors full of Alos as they swing out of Coppers and McLean's along the back straight. You can just see Littlejohn weaving around there, getting a little bit of heat into his tyres. The same also for Andrew Ferguson. And good reason, because he's got a very feisty looking Manhal Alos trying every trick in the book to see if he can pick his way past as they come over the crest of the hill down into the Melbourne hairpin. And this is opportunity for Ferguson probably to defend on the exit. He can use the torque of the Spider just to pull back clear of the SR8 of Alos. And for Manhal Alos, this is going to be frustrating because he will be able to see James Littlejohn sprinting clear at the front of the field, but Littlejohn knows that he needs to push, and the reason for that is the success second equation has now swung back in favour of Alison Kapadia. They have got 10 fewer seconds in the pits than Wells and Littlejohn. Also, they've both got enough success seconds to make it very interesting in relation to the progress of Jim Booth and Andrew Ferguson in the Spider. So this could be really quite an intriguing race as now Alos pulls the pin, darts to the inside of Andrew Ferguson as they run through the old hairpin and then climbing on towards Swans. Alos already setting forth in pursuit of James Littlejohn. Littlejohn knows that he needs to build as big a lead as possible. I'm sure that once he's got the heat into the tyres, he is just going to put his head down and charge away as best he can. Meanwhile, some good scrapping going on behind. That's Yanni Herpia, who is in pursuit of Mohamed Jawa, and also Peter Tyler, part of that scrap. These are all cars, I think, that got caught in that first corner incident at Redgate, and Herpia taking absolutely no chances, swings around the Saudi Falcons entry, and Peter Tyler, I expect, will be looking to do much the same thing en route towards the Fog TS's. Meanwhile, Andrew Ferguson has got Jim Booth beginning to home in on his tail, and the two Spiders have been having a super scrap all weekend. But safety car in race two possibly really favour Booth much as it might have done, as Jawa under pressure from Tyler, and also the recovering Ricardo Dona. The good news for Dona from that first corner spin is that he didn't pick up any damage to the bodywork of the car, and therefore he's going to be able to push as hard as he wants, as he thought about the brave one to the outside at Gollards. Still tries to see if the outside track is going to give him some joy. Doesn't look like it just at the moment, as Marcello Martiotto coming under a little bit of pressure from Brian Caldwell. Caldwell, who has been really very quick all weekend, continues to push for Martiotto. He knows that he's got the super quick Marco Cenchetti to take over from him in the second half of the race. He also knows that Ricardo Dona hit trouble earlier on, so he just needs to stay out of trouble in this first phase of the race, not pick up any penalties for contact, not get into any sort of trouble, and that might well be enough to give he and Cenchetti the class victory. Actually, probably quite a good overall result as well. That said, Caldwell, as he's done in both of the previous races, pushing very hard in the early stages. Another graduate of the SR1 Cup, Brian Caldwell, looks at the inside of Marco Cenchetti, or rather Marcello Maracchiotto, darts to the inside at the Melbourne hairpin. Nicely judged move, and Maracchiotto saw him coming, made sure that he gave him plenty of room, didn't want to shut the door unnecessarily, didn't want to cause any sort of coming together, and so they switch places, remain as they were. They have got them beginning to close up onto their tail. Brian Harvey as well, and Harvey, who stayed out of trouble through Redgate on that first lap, now again in a good opportunity to challenge for a Supersport class podium as this race begins to unfold. Brian Caldwell already stretching his legs and beginning to ease clear of Marcello Maracchiotto, but Caldwell has got the whole 60 minutes to race single-handedly, and in the earlier race we had that safety car period which made life a little bit easier for the drivers. It meant that they weren't quite on the limit for the whole 60 minutes. It also meant that they were able to manage the heat of the tyres and the tyre cycle just that little bit better, made it a little bit more straightforward for them. Maracchiotto just seems to be reasonably content to follow in the wheel tracks of Brian Caldwell. Caldwell consults his mirrors, just wonders if Maracchiotto is going to think about a move. Maracchiotto absolutely not thinking about making a move, so he just follows in behind as they turn through Fog DS's on towards the Melbourne hairpin. Caldwell misses the apex slightly on the way in. He's able to turn it round, get a nice tight apex on the entry, and then squirt the car up the fairly steep climb, in fact, in towards Goddard's. They pick up the Donington Park National Circuit. Now, here's a good scrap a little bit further back. That's Yanni Herpia busy recovering through the field. Wesley Fongeny is his next target. Wesley in the 12 car. You can see Herpia looming large in his mirrors, but again, does what he needs to do, sticks to the racing line. He's not going to make this easy at all for Yanni Herpia, and they've got Ricardo Dona as well behind them. All these drivers who lost so much time at Redgate on the first lap beginning to ease back through the field. Fortunately, he's got the inside line at Redgate and he has to jump on the brakes, because what the camera angle never really quite shows you is just how tight Redgate corner is, and that the inside line, which is often so good and the preferable option at most circuits and indeed at most corners, just isn't for Redgate. And where is Dona going to make his move? He contemplates it into the old hairpin. There's no way past Fongeny then. Fongeny sticks the car in the middle of the road. He is fighting Ricardo Dona for position, and Dona thinks about a brave move. Looks out, oh, there's contact with Fongeny, and around goes Wesley Fongeny into the gravel trap and out of the race. Very, very angry there, Wesley Fongeny. It was coming through Schwantz that Dona just looked to try and pull the pin. I'm not sure that they were quite aware as to where the other one was. And as a result, side-on-side contact eventually resulting in the spin for Wesley Fongeny, who, I have to say, is right at the periphery of the gravel trap. And is he going to be recoverable? A single marshal is unlikely to do the job, and in turn, that may result in the safety car being scrambled. The body language of Fongeny in the cockpit suggests pure frustration. Here comes James Littlejohn. He can see the stricken car of Wesley Fongeny. He'll be thinking, oh goodness no, because I've built a huge advantage over Manhal Alos that might well now be whittled away. And depending on, and indeed the safety car comes out now, so all of Littlejohn's hard work is undone. Good news is though, he's got a fair few laps between now and the pit window opening, so there's still the opportunity for him to rebuild some advantage over Manhal Alos. The problem being, of course, that the second the pit window opens, Manhal is going to duck into the pits to hand over to Alex Capadia, who is on a par with Littlejohn for pace. So this could be quite a decisive moment in the race, as Fongeny's car is somewhat forlornly towed to the edge of the gravel trap, and It's never more frustrating for a driver when you retire from the race after a spin like that, when the car is completely undamaged and it's just that he's beached in the gravel. The gravel doing its job though, stopping the car safely and securely. The marshals doing their job as they have recovered the incident very quickly and go back racing. And now James Littlejohn is going to be looking to put in a series of qualifying laps as he attempts to break away from Manhal Alos. For Alos, he just knows if he can keep Littlejohn in sight. He's got 10 seconds in his favour in the pits. He's got Alex Kapadia waiting in the wings as well. For Littlejohn, he knows that he needs to build as much of a buffer as possible for Tony Wells to inherit in the second half of the race. So this could be absolutely fascinating. Fight for third also very close. Andrew Ferguson and Jim Booth together. Then the Supersport lead between Brian Caldwell, Marcello Maracchiotto and Brian Harvey. So all of the gaps that had opened up in the early stages in the race now all closed in once more. The two Spiders dicing over third place swing on to the back straight. Jim Booth keeping Andrew Ferguson in his sights, and what we've seen with Jim all year is he's just metronomically consistent. We very, very rarely see the American driver making mistakes, and he, I'm sure, will just continue to apply the pressure. As the good news is that Wesley Fauncheny is back up and running. He's got the SR3 fired up and is back into the fray. Bad news for Wesley is that he is several laps down. There's Martin Verity, who is just clear of the recovering Yanni Herpia and Ricardo Donan. It's good news for both of them in those gaps have been closed up. It'll be interesting though to see whether or not there is any adjudication about that contact between Donan and Fauncheny. Peter Tyler, meanwhile, eases past Konstantin Gurkaev, and certainly a view that that contact, there was nothing malicious in it. It was more that I'm not sure that Wesley Fauncheny was quite aware how far alongside Ricardo Donan was at the point he began to set up for the corner. And now Donan sets about Yanni Herpia. Herpia has his car in all the right places, however, as they run down through the Craner curves into the old hairpin. Donan, you can just see the car moving around a little bit as he's in that turbulent air. Has to rely more on the mechanical grip. The aerodynamic grip levels not quite what they were. Donan then picks up the throttle and runs uphill. And Herpia, though, he knows he can't afford to make a mistake. If he does, Donan will be passed in a shot as the pair of them head along the back straight over that big ripple in the road, which can cause so many problems in wet weather because the cars go light, the traction breaks away from them before they then chink through Fog Diesses. Meanwhile, a bit of a mistake, a very big lock-up, in fact, from Marcello Maracchiotto. Shows just how hard he's pushing into the Melbourne hairpin, and that's not going to be good news for Marco Ciancetti to inherit that sort of flat spot for the latter stage of the race. As now the pit window is open, and with immediate effect into the pit lane comes Manhal Alos. Or is that in fact a drive-through penalty? Because Alos could see that there was Kapadia, who was at the side of the pit box without his equipment on. I just wonder, yes indeed it was, Alos has just rejoined the fray. Now, I don't know why Manhalos picked up that drive-through penalty, but he certainly did, and that is a real shame for Alos, because it has essentially unwound all of the advantage that he potentially gained through the safety car period, and it makes Alex Kapadia's task even tougher. Alos trying to scythe through traffic. His first target is Brian Caldwell. That's probably not a battle for the faint-hearted. Two of the more robust drivers in the Radical European Masters will keep it clean, but also keep it very close. As the mistake from Caldwell goes skittering off through the gravel trap, and fortunately is able to keep his footing, rejoins. That's made life a little bit easier for Manhal. It's also bad news for Brian Caldwell. He's going to rejoin in about 7th place in the Supersport class, possibly will be demoted to 8th if Peter Tyler can challenge him into the Fog Diesses, and therefore his period at the front of the class is well and truly done. Meanwhile, Brian Harvey and Marcello Maracchiotto, the next two targets for Manhal Alos, and they are beginning to approach the pit window opening, that false appearance of the pit window opening, as Alos jinked in. Ricardo Donor able to clear the car of Martin Verity. So we've got lots of battles getting to unfold as now into the pit lane comes Manhalos, and this is the pit stop. He jumps out, the fuel goes in, and then it will be the turn of Alex Kapadia to see how much of that trip through the pit lane for Manhalos has been able to overcome. Now, there is a question as well. Was that a drive-through penalty, or was that possibly just preempting the pit stop, pit window opening by that? Nonetheless, Alos went through, and he's lost some time. Meanwhile, Giotto is in to hand over to Cianchetti and Alex Kapadia, with Alos losing about 20 seconds through that trip through the pit lane. Has now really got a job to do. He has got the advantage of 10 fewer success seconds. Meanwhile, Mohamed Jawa is in, and that is going to be Faisal Bin Laden who takes over from him. Ricardo Donor hands over to Stuart Mosley. So we've got some very quick drivers in the Supersport class about to rejoin the fray, and it is Cianchetti who's going to emerge as the front of them. And this is the opportunity for Cianchetti to give himself a Maratiotto victory in the final of the Supersport class runs of the weekend. Kapadia, meanwhile, heads into the race. We'll expect that James Littlejohn is going to stay in the pits and stay on track rather until the very, very end of the pit window. And so essentially Kapadia is going to be racing a car that he can't see, and that of James Littlejohn, but I'm sure that he will be informed on the radio of their comparative lap times. Andrew Ferguson also has completed his pit stop and gets back into the race. His battle with Jim Booth is, I'm sure, going to go all the way through to the flag. As Ferguson plants his foot to the accelerator and actually has come out in some nice clear air, so it's going to be good for Andrew Ferguson just to rejoin his rhythm, as now Jim Booth comes in for his pit stop, rolls to a halt, and here is Alex Kapadia, who's just behind Stuart Mosley. The pair of them, both two of the pro drivers in the championship, and Stuart, I'm sure, isn't going to make this unduly difficult for Kapadia. At the same time, he'll have his car in all the right places when he needs to be, but the straight line speed of the SR8 should be sufficient to overhaul the SR3, but through the Craner curves and the old hairpin, Mosley will just be able to keep Kapadia behind him, and Alex recognises that, doesn't fling the car quite as hard as he could have done. Meanwhile, in the pit lane, Tony Wells waits to take over from James Littlejohn. Here is the race leader, Littlejohn, who has led since the lights went out, and is, with circumstances, possibly going to be able to give Littlejohn or Wells a defensible barrier through the second half of the race. Yanni Herpia, meanwhile, takes his turn to rejoin the action. This has been a frustrating lap here for Alex Kapadia, because Alos lost time prior to the pit stops, and Kapadia has lost the best part of a lap behind Stuart Mosley, and Mosley only now is able to be vanquished, or is he, because he looks to fight back around the outside of Kapadia. Kapadia, though, has got the inside line for Goddard's, and more importantly, he's got the straight line speed. Faced like thunder there for Manhal Alos. One that got away. Meanwhile, plenty of grass to be cleared out of the Saudi Falcons car. And also in trouble is Andrew Ferguson. He runs wide through the old hairpin, and that is possibly advantage Jim Booth. We'll find out in a moment's time. Martin Verity and Brian Caldwell continue their scrap. At the moment, it's Verity who has got the advantage over Caldwell, who gets it all wrong for the second time. Takes a trip through the gravel trap. This time he becomes precariously close to the tyre wall. It's easily done. It's good news for Kapadia. That is another potential obstruction that he's been able to overhaul without any difficulty. It also is good news for Stuart Mosley, who looks to power past Caldwell and gain the place. And that could be crucial with an eye towards the Supersport podium later on. Cianchetti you'd expect to see as the favourite for that, but third place in the Supersport class is at the moment wide open. Getting towards the latter stages of the pit window as Andrew Ferguson has recovered from that error at the old hairpin, but he then makes another one, a quick spin. And he's going to go back, is he, and dink the tyre wall. Just stops the car in time. He's going to lose a hatful of seconds, and that surely is going to promote Jim Booth. Meanwhile, the thumbs up from the mechanic would suggest that into the pit lane now comes James Littlejohn. Rolls to a halt. The belts undone almost the instant the car comes to a stop. Little John gets out. They'll have to top up the fuel. Little John could just give the briefing to Tony Wells. Not that there's really an awful lot to confer over or hand over, and then once Wells gets in the car, what's his gap over Alex Capardia going to be, and is it going to be defendable for the remaining 22 minutes or so of the race? Wells climbs into the cockpit. The team get to work with the harness, and here meanwhile is Alex Capardia. Capardia trying to hustle his way past Martin Verity. Verity didn't really want to give it to him, but Capardia able to find a way past. All the while, Tony Wells waiting for the signal that now comes to rejoin the race. Now, where is he in relation to Alex Capardia? Wells punches the throttle, turns into Redgate corner, and it would appear as if he's going to have a reasonably comfortable gap here over Capardia. And that is going to be very good news. Tony Wells, meanwhile, some good battling amongst the Supersport runners as Stuart Mosley doing everything he can in his pursuit of Marco Cianchetti. His first target, however, is Martin Verity. And is Mosley going to be close enough to challenge Verity on the way into Goddard's? Not quite. So he takes that wider swooping line in, then looks for the tight apex on the exit. Might just give him a little bit more momentum coming into Redgate next time around. Here is Capardia. He's just picked his way past Faisal Bin Laden. Now that's Capardia, a bit between his teeth now. Really having to push, trying to see if he can get Tony Wells in sight between now and the checker flag. It's going to be a touch and go thing as Tom Gladys climbs onto terms with Yanni Herpier. Gladys and Herpier together with Harvey's probably battling for that final Supersport podium spot, and Tom Gladys is going to try and force the move through the Crater curves. Great racing this, as Gladys still runs side by side with Yanni Herpier, and Herpier eventually has to concede to Gladys. Really brave move there from Tom Gladys, and that's why the drivers love racing here at Donington Park. You do get the opportunity for that side-by-side action at really very tricky parts of the circuit. Now here is the race leader, Tony Wells. He will know that Alex Capardia is closing in on him all the while. He will also know that the clock is ticking down, and each and every lap completed is a lap closer to the checker flag. Meanwhile, Capardia is now up into second place. He's found a way past Jim Booth. Booth in a very solid third. And Capardia, well, it's a big ask for Alex Capardia, but he might just be able to do it. He's going to be 3 or 4 seconds a lap quicker than Tony Wells, and depending on how Wells triggers the last lap of the race, how much time is left on the clock when he goes into the last lap, might be the sort of margin that this comes down to. For now, though, Capardia, the bit between his teeth, his head down, is just pushing as hard as he can. Kicks up a little bit of dust on the exit of the old hairpin, climbs up here. You can just see from the poise of the car as he heads through Coppice and McLean's how hard he is pushing, absolutely on the limit, and the epitome of controlled aggression. Meanwhile, Konstantin Gudkaev making solid progress in the number 9 car. He's got Wesley Fongini on the road in front of him, but of course Fongini all out of sequence after his safety car prompting moment earlier on. So Gudkaev is not really racing Fongini for position. Tony Wells is racing a car that he can't see but knows is catching him for position, and that is Alex Capardia. We are getting towards the latter stages of the race, but there's still going to be time for 5 or 6 more laps, and Capardia getting ever closer to Wells, the tension beginning to mount. And this is where the experience of the professional driver really starts to pay dividends. Capardia, he knows what he needs to do. He's going to be as calm as you like in the cockpit, just beginning to push. Meanwhile, Tom Harvey onto turns with Martin Verity, and Harvey sides past. This is an important move for Harvey. It's going to put him up onto the Supersport podium. And Verity, as a result, doesn't want to relinquish the ground, but he eventually has to. He's offline as they head into the fog TSs. He's to the inside. He has to brake a little bit more sharply than Harvey, and the job is done. Verity looks to fight back, though, into the Montreal hairpin, but there isn't space there, and already Tom Gladys is closing up onto the pair of them, but they are rapidly running out of laps. The task for Gladys certainly to get himself and Peter Tyler, third podium of the weekend, is looking ever stiffer. But the first target for Gladys is to dispatch Martin Verity. Of course, if Verity defends from Gladys, it's going to give Harvey the opportunity to build a few more seconds worth of a buffer over Tom Gladys. Gladys, though, just begins to force that tiny mistake from Verity as they came through Redgate. Verity just kicking up the dust, shows he put a wheel or so over the edge of the curb, and that was enough to allow Gladys to draw a little bit closer as they turn through the old hairpin. But Gladys is not going to be able to force the move through Schwantz, so he might have to wait until the Fogarty S's, and you can see the advantage as a result that Tom Harvey has already been able to build. That's about 2 seconds through the first half of this lap. And gaps like this can be, particularly when the cars are so evenly matched, can be very, very hard to chase down, particularly as Gladys is just struggling through these mid-speed corners to get through that turbulent air behind Martin Verity. It means that he's not going to be close enough to challenge Verity as they jump on the brakes for the Fogarty S's. A pair of them run through on towards the Melbourne Loop, which again opens up an overtaking opportunity which Gladys gladly seizes, and this time he's able to make the move on Martin Verity. Already you can see that Tom Harvey is just a little bit further up the road, and are there going to be enough laps left in the race for Gladys to be able to chase that gap down and find a way past Tom Harvey? I think the first is probably possible. The second is going to be that little bit trickier to achieve. Nonetheless, Gladys navigates Redgate without any issues. Martin Verity is there, poised to pick up any pieces worse than scratch to emerge. Meanwhile, Tony Wells in and amongst the traffic. He's been able to find a way past Konstantin Gurkaev. His next target is Wesley Fourgeny. And Fourgeny shouldn't make this too difficult for Wells. He'll see in his mirrors that Tony Wells is there, and he does exactly what the race director would have told him to do in the briefing, which is he sticks to the racing line and allows the faster car to find a way around him. And so Tony Wells will also be comforted on that occasion by the fact that Alex Kapadia wasn't really in sight behind him. Meanwhile, Tom Harvey seems to be stretching his legs and actually moving clear of Tom Gladys as Gladys struggles to fully shake off Martin Verity, who's able to take advantage of the tow, take advantage with being able to ride in behind Gladys as they run down the back straight, swing through the Fogarty S's. Meanwhile, Konstantin Gurkaev and Wesley Fourgeny still continuing to enjoy this good scrap. It's not really one that's going to have much bearing on race positions, but they are very evenly matched as drivers, evenly matched in terms of the car preparation and performance available to them, and therefore they are thoroughly enjoying going wheel to wheel. They jink through the Fogarty S's on towards the Montreal hairpin. Now here is our race leader Tony Wells. Where is Alex Kapadia? The question. Well, at the moment Kapadia is not really within sight of Tony Wells, and that is good news for Wells, but he knows at the rate of capture from Kapadia that really as soon as he gets sight of Alex Kapadia, it's only going to be a lap or two before Kapadia is snapping right at his heels. Wells reels off another lap. He gets that step closer to the checkered flag. Fourgeny and Gurkaev battle continues to simmer. And of course this is going to have to be passed by Alex Kapadia, so that's going to be a point of delay. And you just saw Kapadia there at the back of your picture, and I'd suggest that Kapadia is now within about 10 to 12 seconds or so of Tony Wells, and Wells will be frantically counting down the laps left in this race. Jim Booth in third, fourth, and leading the Supersport class is Marco Ciancetti. After the disappointment of race 2 and the early retirement, well, Ciancetti and Maracchiotto bouncing back in the best possible way with what's looking as if it's going to be a fairly comfortable victory in the Supersport class. And with events at Monza and Jerez to go, the championship really beginning to come to the boil, and two very different circuits as well. Monza, the cathedral of the speed, and Jerez, a tighter and twistier circuit, as it's third time in the race through the gravel trap for Brian Caldwell, and again he's able to just about keep it out of something solid, but it shows how hard he's pushing. And also by this stage of the weekend, the drivers are coming up to having had the best part of 2 3/4 hours of race time behind the wheel, plus all the practice and qualifying that they'll have done as well. And this is the point where fatigue is possibly just going to start to bite as well. Because if you think single-seater racers on the route towards Formula 1, they'll only be doing races of this duration by the time they get up towards GP2 level. Levels of concentration required are absolutely immense. Meanwhile, Tom Gladys now in pursuit of Tom Harvey. This is the fight for third in the Supersport class, and at the moment Harvey just able to keep Gladys behind him, and we rather thought that Gladys would be able to close the gap. Whether or not we'll be able to find a way past is another matter altogether. But there are still a few laps left in the race. There might be time for Gladys to just dig something out, pick his way past. They've also got Brian Caldwell as well to navigate, and Caldwell has had those 3 wayward moments. It will be reasonably easy prey for Harvey and Gladys. Stuart Mosley, who's second in the Supersport class, is going to be a little bit too far up the road, and Chenchetti an unrealistic target, but the final podium of the weekend very much on the cards. A pair of them swing out of the old hairpin on through Schwantz, all the while trying to pursue Brian Caldwell. Now here is the battle for the lead of the race as we go into the last lap, and Alex Kapadia, it's going to take an absolutely phenomenal final lap of the race, I think, for him to overhaul Tony Wells. But he's going to make it pretty close by the time that they get to the checkered flag, and it was just a couple of seconds too many, wasn't it, for Kapadia to really do anything about Wells. But Wells has got a buffer that is being closed down, and the rate of capture from Alex Kapadia is such that that gap is going to close a little bit over the course of this last lap of the race. Out of Schwantz and on towards Coppis and McLean's. There you see Kapadia hurtling into view, and he is going to try and make this as interesting as he can, but he doesn't at the same time want to do anything silly and risk throwing away the finish and the points. It's been a frustrating weekend for Matt Hallos and Alex Kapadia, because it looks as if for the 3rd race in succession they're going to finish as runners-up behind Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. As Tony Wells heads into the Melbourne hairpin for the final time, he's got a little bit of traffic in the form of Martin Verity to contend with. I suspect that Wells would rather that wasn't something he had to deal with on the run to the flag, particularly with Kapadia closing onto his tail. But in the end, Martin Verity leaves a nice hole for Tony Wells into Goddard's. So it's going to be the clean sweep at Donington Park in the Radical European Masters for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. They win all 3 races from Alex Kapadia and Manhal Alos. And it's going to be Jim Booth who will complete the podium. And Kapadia, well, it was a super performance. He got to win about 2.5 seconds or so of Wells at the flag. Another lap, and it could have been one better. Meanwhile, Jim Booth heads Marco Chenchetti, and Chenchetti has got what would seem to be the car of Stuart Mosley right onto his tail as they come through Goddard's. This is the fight for the Supersport class win, and it is going to be Marco Chenchetti, Marcello Maratiotto who take that victory in the Supersport class. In fact, it was the very similar car of Gurkaev just behind. So a look then at the following results. Littlejohn and Wells do the clean sweep from Kapadia and Alos. Jim Booth completes the podium. Maratiotto and Chenchetti win the Supersport class from Donor and Mosley. So on to the podium and the 3rd step of the rostrum for Jim Booth. Runners-up, Manhal Alos and Alex Kapadia. And treble race winners at Donington Park, Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. And not unsurprisingly, big grins for the pair of them.
Well done, Tony. Well done, James.
And they make straight for the bubbly. And in the Supersport class, Tom and Brian Harvey in 3rd place. 2nd place to Ricardo Donor and Stuart Mosley, with Marco Chenchetti and Marcello Maratiotto claiming the Supersport class win.
So they get on to the top step of the podium. And then I think with that, whilst those trophies are being handed out, I'll hand you back for...
Snooker award going to Marco Ciancetti as well, with lots of very happy drivers on the podium receiving the trophies from Will Brown from Radical. The Dunlop hats are distributed for the official photographs. We will set our sights on the final rounds of the season, but it's been a fantastic weekend of racing at Donington Park, and one dominated by Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. They are the treble winners in the Radical European Masters.